Welcome back to Rare Connection. I'm your host, Joanna, and today's conversation is for every family living with a rare or ultra rare condition. One of the most uh, consistent themes across all rare diseases is that families often have to look outside the United States for meaningful research pathways. Trials here can require millions of dollars before a single patient enrolls, and many families don't realize that there are regions globally where early research can move faster, more affordably, and with fewer barriers. My guest today is Julio Martínez-Clark. Has spent his career building exactly those pathways. As CEO of multiple global research and medtech organizations, he works across Latin America, the Balkans, and Australia to help rare and ultra rare communities access clinical trials that might otherwise be out of reach. Today, we're going to talk about what global access really looks like, um, what options families actually have, and how international collaboration um, may change the future of rare disease treatment. So, can you explain what inspired you to work bringing clinical trials and new therapies to places the like Latin America and the Balkans?
Sure, Joanna. First of all, thanks for having me here in the podcast. A pleasure to be with your audience. Yes, I started about 15 years ago. Our company, bioaccess, was started actually about 20 years ago inside the University of Miami. My brother Pedro is one of the co-founders of the company with his mentor, Dr. William O'Neill. They're both interventional cardiologists. Pedro, my brother, trained at Harvard and the Harvard Medical School at the Beth Israel Medical Center in Boston. And Dr. O'Neill has an outstanding career. He's one of the leading and most famous interventional cardiologists in the world today. And they both advised many uh, startup companies that were developing advanced cardiovascular technologies. As I said, about 20 years ago is when they started this work inside the University of Miami. But now it's outside of it because they decided to create a company, which is now bioaccess outside of the university ecosystem. But that work is really what let me get involved with advancing clinical research outside of the United States. When they were when they were advising these companies in the United States on how to execute first human trials, they quickly realized that the best places to do this clinical research was outside of the United States for the reasons that you stated. It's a lot easier, faster, and cheaper to do these trials overseas. And companies usually go to Eastern Europe, they go to Australia and to Latin America as places where they can execute this first human research. And then they go back to the United States with the clinical data that they gather, and they speak with the FDA about executing a larger trial inside the United States. They, of course, speak with their investors to raise more funds, and they speak with their what in the industry we call strategics, which are larger companies like Medtronic, Abbott, Boston Scientific, that may be interested in acquiring these little startups. So, so yeah, one day my brother called me and he said that he was doing first human trials in Colombia. We were born and raised in Colombia, but we left the country many years ago. but Colombia was a natural fit for us to start this first human work. And through the University of Miami, Pedro, my brother, and Dr. O'Neill started collaborating with a local investigator in Cali, Colombia, and they quickly realized that Colombia was at that time the perfect place to do this type of research.
Mhm. So for families listening who are brand new to this concept, what does global trial acceleration actually mean?
Well, the name of the game for these companies, Joanna, is time. Time to get a patient treated with their innovation. In other words, in the United States, it takes too long. It is really difficult and it's very expensive to execute these trials. So they, as I said, they have to go overseas. They're forced to go overseas. So they need to accelerate the execution of these trials. So what we do is we're just a platform. We're facilitators of the trial execution. We accelerate the activation of clinical research sites outside the United States so that these companies can have the clinical data that they need to test the safety and efficacy of these innovations so that they can speak with the FDA, as I said before, about executing a larger clinical trial and get US FDA clearance to place the innovation in the market. So that's what we mean by global trial accelerator. We accelerate the execution of these trials, which are really, really slow to execute in the
Mm.
United States.
Hmm. Yeah, any research takes time though, so uh,
Yes, yes, it takes
a
time,
lot
and
of time.
time is money. Time is
Yep.
money, especially for a startup. I mean, imagine a startup that raise funds. They usually license these innovations from universities in the United States. They raise a few $1 million, three, five, or something. They build a team around the company, 3 to 5 people, and then they start developing the technology or the molecule. And money is tight for these companies because these are expensive professionals that they have to pay salaries, they have to pay fees, et cetera, consultants, et cetera. They have to pay labs to do the testing and things like that. So the burn rate of these companies is really, really high, Joanna. It's
Mm-hmm.
probably $300,000 a month, in salaries and everything else that I just mentioned. So they need to execute these clinical trials really, really fast because every day that they wait is a day they're burning cash.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's how it works.
So, why are certain regions able to start trials more quickly or affordably than the US?
Well, let's start with affordability. Uh, if you go to developing economies like Colombia, like El Salvador, Brazil, Mexico, Dominican Republic, even if you go on vacation, you
Mm.
quickly realize that the hot dog in the streets
Yeah.
of Brazil or Sao Paulo is way cheaper than a hot dog in New York. So it's just basic um, uh, standard of living, different cost of living. So and that's usually because of the currency exchange ratio, right? So
Mm.
the average salary for a physician in Latin America is way lower than the United States, and everything else around medical care is way lower. And there's a lot of business with medical tourism. A lot of US patients
Mm-hmm.
go overseas, especially to Latin America, since it is closer, for cost effective care, like plastic surgery, dental work, ophthalmology care, things like that. So, same thing happens with clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
Companies, instead of individuals, look for ways to execute these trials cheaper, and they know that in Latin America is way lower than the United States. It's usually 30% or more sometimes lower than the United States. So that in itself is great savings for these startup companies. And
Mm.
if you add the fact that the red tape and the approval process for these trials is faster than the United States for many reasons. I mean, we're talking about smaller countries, smaller regulatory agencies. They're less busy. They're more inclined to attract clinical research because they understand that clinical research brings money to the country. This is foreign direct investment. A big pharmaceutical company or a small startup from the United States with a few $1 million in the bank, this destined to be invested in a country that can recruit patients and approve the trial fast, is an attractive proposition for any country, especially in developing economies, that they
Mm-hmm.
see clinical research as a source of income. And also, they realize that patients, when they are in a clinical trial, they are not paid by the national healthcare system, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it removes the burden of the cost of the care of that patient from the government to the pharmaceutical company. So that in itself is great savings. Imagine if you're talking about millions of patients involved in clinical trials or enrolled in clinical trials, that means a lot of money for these countries that is being saved,
Mm-hmm.
that the pharmaceutical company is paying, and they're not paying out of their own pocket. So, so yeah, there are many benefits why these countries are inclined to attract more clinical trials and create expedited pathways to get them approved faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was in traveling British Isles, and they actually had a well, if you don't finish your house, you don't have to pay property taxes, which I really like. You know,
I didn't hear that. I didn't know about that, but that's good.
yeah, I can leave off a garage, no problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Many of the families listening today are in the ultra rare and rare communities, with either no trials or U.S. costs in the millions.
Hmm.
What realistic options do they have internationally?
Well, I would say that the first step is to speak with your physician about the possibility of getting enrolled in a clinical trial, and with his or her assistance or on your own as a patient, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and search for trials. There are millions of trials listed in clinicaltrials.gov, which is the U.S. government's database of clinical research. Every U.S. company that is conducting a trial in the United States or outside of the United States and is looking to use the data, the clinical data from a clinical trial for a U.S. submission, for an FDA U.S. submission and market clearance eventually, is mandated by law to post the trial in clinicaltrials.gov, the database. So you go there and you can find trials. And now with artificial intelligence, there are tools where you can put the link of the trial in ChatGPT, and you can get a simplified and simple language version of the trial because sometimes the terminology is too difficult to understand. So the point is that you're going to be able to find trials, and then if your physician is if your doctor is willing to help you participate in these trials, it'll probably be a doctor to doctor conversation, the U.S. physician speaking with investigator overseas about the fact that there is a patient that who may benefit from the trial and is willing to travel to get enrolled in the trial and get screened for the trial. So I think that's a realistic step that anybody in the United States looking for trials overseas can take.
Mhm.
Of course,
Uh,
you're going to have some costs involved because you have to travel overseas. I don't think. I mean, the pharmaceutical company, the sponsor of the trial, may or may not cover the cost of the travel. It's possible.
mhm.
It really depends on the how rare the disease is, how difficult it is to recruit patients. If I were a pharmaceutical company and a patient from Zimbabwe wants to participate in a trial that I'm doing in Panama, I'd be more than happy to pay for the trip and everything because I really, really need that patient.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, what early phases or exploratory trial models outside of the U.S. could be promising for conditions with very small populations.
I'm sorry, can you
Oh,
paraphrase the question?
yeah. So see, what early phases or exploratory trial models outside the U.S. Um, could be promising for smaller for conditions with very small populations. Thinking conditions like NETMOS, superficial siderosis are two of them.
Hmm.
CLC6 is another one, doesn't even have a name.
Hmm. Okay.
Many of them last season did not have names. That
Hmm.
was that
Wow.
was kind of like the season of
Hmm.
no names.
Okay. Well, I don't have off the top of my head the list of trials that are happening overseas for rare diseases. I'm sure there are a few. As I said, clinicaltrial.gov is the repository or the database where these trials are posted in. However, what I can say is that the prevalence of certain diseases is is tied sometimes to a geographical location. So
Mm,
the pharmaceutical company or, or a network group as well. So the pharmaceutical company looks for where these patients may be. If it is tied to a geographical location, let's say uh, people in the Andes develop this rare disease and there is no treatment for them, then of course you have to be part of the Andes region to participate in this trial because if you're white Caucasian, I don't think you're going to be a good fit for the trial because
mm,
yeah, and also the ethnic group thing. If you are probably of African American descent, and these rare disease occurs in blacks,
mm,
then the trial can be done overseas. The trial can be done in Africa or can be done in Brazil, where the black population is huge. But if you're a black U.S. citizen, you could potentially participate in this trial. So it really depends on the condition. It really depends on the drug being developed, and really depends on the prevalence of the disease being more an ethnic group type of disease that is prevalent in that group, or a disease that is prevalent in certain parts of the world. For example, there is a famous uh, Alzheimer research done in the Andes in Colombia, in the coffee growing region, in the Antioquia region, where Medellin is, the capital city of Antioquia.
mm,
But that region of the world in South America and Colombia specifically has a population that has developed this rare Alzheimer expression. And there's been articles. There's Dr. Lopera has led this research. There's been articles in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal about his work in this specific population that has developed this rare Alzheimer expression. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's all I
yeah.
know about the topic.
Okay. So yeah. My condition, homocystinuria, is actually most common in Qatar, of all
Hmm.
places.
Wow. Interesting.
And so I'm surprised they aren't doing anything there, but
Yeah.
it's
Exactly. Yeah.
so see, how do you evaluate whether conditions, whether a condition has a viable pathway for early research in another country?
Well, that's a great question. And that's kind of the holy grail of clinical research.
Mm,
Most trials fail because of lack of recruitment. About 80% of failures in trials is due to poor recruitment. And poor recruitment is usually associated with poor selection of the site, poor selection of the investigator, or poor research uh, in the prevalence of the disease, etc.
Hmm.
So the trial, the site search and selection and investigator selection process is a very important piece of the research methodology, because it really sets the tone for the rest of the trial or the project. In other words, if you don't do a really, really good site search and selection, including everything that I just mentioned, like researching the prevalence of the disease, how far the patients live from the hospital, things like that, then you're not going to be able to recruit enough patients for the trial.
Hmm.
So what we do is we tap into databases, local databases. Usually countries have some type of database. Some countries have better ones than others, but somehow you tap into databases to see how prevalent disease is. And you, of course, evaluate logistical conditions, like what I just said. For example, patients live very far from hospitals, then you're going to have an issue with transportation and things like that. So, um, EMRs, I mean, electronic medical records of the hospital, of course, that's your first tool. If you find a busy hospital in a rural area or a busy hospital in an urban area that covers your target population, then you have to look at the EMR, the electronic medical records database of that specific hospital, to see if patients are actually being seen there in that hospital. So it's a combination of both databases, the national database, which is usually called a claims database, where usually these countries overseas, I mean, everywhere in the world, usually the government runs a large database, a claims database that captures all the patient encounters somehow. So that's the only way to do stats to have metrics on the healthcare system of a country. So these databases, as I said, some are better than others. In combination with local EMR hospital databases, is really the only way to go about trying to find patients.
Hmm. So you mentioned that how you find them, but how do you get the word out there about the trials?
Yes. Well, there are two ways to do that. One is a direct patient-facing campaign, so to speak, marketing campaign or recruitment campaign, and the other
Hmm.
one is through physicians. For example, um, you can set up on the first one, on the former one, you can set up ads on social media, a landing page, so that you capture the interest of some patients who saw the ad, and they landed on the landing page and they completed a pre-screening questionnaire
Hmm.
that you receive via email as a hospital that is doing the trial, and then you can call the patients back, and then you follow up with them to schedule an appointment for them to come to the hospital and be screened for the trial. That's
Hmm.
one way to do it. The other way is through referring physicians, as I said, which in essence is trying to find those physicians who see these patients a lot. If it is a rare disease and you know that usually endocrinologists, for example, see these patients every day, then you try to do dinners. You try to call them. I mean, if you're the investigator, if I am the investigator of a trial, I call my colleague and we have a doctor to doctor conversation about the benefit of his or her patients are going to receive from participating in the trial. So yeah, that's those are really the only two ways to do it that I know of. I know there are services out there that are like databases of patients. For example, there are patient groups, um, advocacy groups or patient associations, where you can also tap into and go to an association of these groups and see if they can share with their members the fact that there's a trial that will likely benefit them. So yeah, those
Hmm.
three ones I think are the top ones that I usually see around.
Hmm. Do you take advantage of the nonprofits?
Exactly. That's what I just said. I mean, these
Yeah.
associations, these patient groups are usually nonprofits, of course.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, there's growing amount of nonprofits these days.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So, um, let's see. You've seen parent-led foundations move research faster than traditional institutions. What are the most effective things small foundations can do?
Foundations.
Yes,
What exactly do you mean by foundations?
I mean nonprofits mostly.
Nonprofit, like patient advocacy groups, as patient associations, and things like that.
Yes.
Okay, what can they do to? Just trying to understand the question. What can they do to have their members
Uh,
access trials or?
what can they? What's the most effective thing that a small foundation can do? Thinking like CLC and six has a foundation that there's only six members of.
Okay. And what's the most effective thing they can do to accomplish what, Joanna?
To get it, they actually have one that they're working on a trial now in the U.S. But if they wanted to go overseas, what would be where the majority of their population is? Because they're
Mm,
pretty spread out among those six people.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what could they do?
Well, if it is a nonprofit, I think pharmaceutical companies or the sponsor of the clinical trial will be happy to speak with them somehow to get their members to participate in the trial because this is the best financial interest of the pharmaceutical company, the sponsor of the clinical trial, to have these conversations with nonprofits. I mean, remember, patients, especially when the molecule is being developed in the early stages, patients are gold.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that there's one patient identified is really, really the holy grail of every clinical program for smaller pharmaceutical companies. In my experience, I usually get involved in very small trials, 5 to 20 patients, and every patient is just like finding a needle in a haystack. And we really, really go uh, I mean, all hands on deck to try to screen that patient and to recruit that patient to the trial. So yeah, I think the best thing they can do is to approach the pharmaceutical companies that are sponsoring these trials. They are all listed in clinicaltrials.gov as well.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some misconceptions um, nonprofits or families have about global trials?
Yes, yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions. I mean, people think that trials take advantage of people, that they go overseas because they want to find naive patients in underserved or uneducated populations and things like that. And that's not really true. I mean, there are international guidelines that have been around for more than 50, 60 years or more since late 1940 something at the end of the World War II, when the Nazis started experimented with the Jews and things like that. So after the world came together and we as humanity we established the guidelines, the international guidelines that we all have to abide to when we do clinical research. And those guidelines are really, really well respected by the clinical trial community, by the pharmaceutical industry, et cetera, because it's in the best financial interest of everybody involved, including patients, that these guidelines are in place and are respected. So if I do a clinical trial in Zimbabwe, I have to adhere to international guidelines. There's really no work around it because no reputable investigator will ruin his or her reputation by doing a trial that is not uh, conducted according to international guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've been in this industry for about 20 years, Joanna, and I've never seen abuse. Honestly, never seen abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, okay, so thinking about the areas that you're dealing with, how do they differ from the U.S.?
The areas, you mean the therapeutic areas or the geographical
So
areas?
as far as the research, what differs?
Well, if we talk about countries, the research is pretty much standardized around the world, as I said, because of the international guidelines. That kind of sets the bar
Mhm,
of global clinical research. Everybody has to receive the same training from the same sources. There's really little variation, little variation. And no, I think it's pretty much standardized. It's very well standardized. That's a great question. I've never had that question before. And now that I think about it, the way you conduct a trial in the United States is pretty much the same as the way you conduct a trial in Panama,
mhm,
because you're using the same international guidelines, the same training material, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I don't think there's much variability in how trials are conducted overseas versus the United States.
mhm,
Of course, there's, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, Joanna, there are cost savings. There's expedited approval reviews and approvals of these trials overseas, but that's a more national thing. Of course, every country, on top of the international guidelines, every country has some local regulations
mhm,
that that complement the international guidelines. Just to give you an
mhm,
example, in every trial you need an insurance policy. That's by international guidelines. But if you go to Colombia, the government of Colombia has enacted laws that determine how specifically, what language specifically the insurance policy needs to have, or what language specifically the patient informed consent needs to have to be accepted in a clinical trial in Colombia. And
mhm,
that varies around countries because every country has different laws and regulations. But the international guidelines that there's got to be a patient informed consent. How it's actually drafted and with what specific language is what changes from country to country. You see what I mean? So,
mhm,
but every country needs to have a patient informed consent. The shape it takes in that country may differ from other countries, but every patient by international guidelines need to sign an informed consent form along with the investigator.
mhm,
And some countries say you need two witnesses. Some other countries say one witness is enough, but they all have to sign an informed consent.
mhm.
Yeah.
So how can nonprofits partner with countries where trials are easier to launch?
I think that partnering is more with the pharmaceutical company sponsoring the trial. I don't think nonprofit are going to be able to partner with countries because there's really no centralized clinical trial body in countries except for the regulatory agency, and they're not really interested in partnering with anybody uh, for anything. That's been my experience. Uh, Again, I think the interest of partnering with nonprofits is more on the pharmaceutical company sponsoring the trial.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So what does global access to gene therapy realistically look like in the next decade?
Interesting question. Interesting question. I think it's going to grow a lot. Um, I am not an expert in gene therapy, but we participated in a trial, in a gene therapy trial that was about 7 years ago. And if I look at the technology that they have developed now, the technology that they had 7 years ago was like baby steps. And I thought it was impressive. I thought it was science fiction 7 years ago. And now when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, it was really prehistoric. What they developed in the past few years
Mm,
is just amazing, just out of this world. So I think progress, there's been a lot of progress in gene therapy, and we're going to continue making progress, especially with AI. AI is now involved in all aspects of clinical research. So, so eventually there will be more. Yeah.
Uh,
But again, I'm not an expert in gene therapy, but from what I see that the field is growing a lot, is maturing a lot. Yeah.
mhm. Like it or not, AI is here to stay.
Yes. 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 Exactly.
A lot of people are against it.
Yes, that's right here.
Are certain countries more open to early gene therapy trials than others? Why?
Yes. Yes. Some countries are more open, as I said, Joanna, especially smaller countries. Though some countries like Mexico, for example, Mexico has made very, very good changes in their laws recently in the past 3 to 5 years to attract more and more trials. The president of Mexico is already speaking about it. So, but but in the smaller countries, you see even more interest. For example, El Salvador, Panama. I've seen a lot of interest in attracting more and more trials in every therapeutic area, including gene therapy, of course. But they really, really want to have pharmaceutical companies sponsoring trials locally because they understood that that by bringing trials, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, they're going to benefit the population. They're going to attract foreign direct investments, and the local population is going to have access to therapies that are not commercially available yet in the country, and will probably never be available if it wasn't for the clinical trial. And also, the other thing that I've observed recently is the fact that these countries also want to attract trials to learn how to become innovators, right? It's like when you bring a top soccer player from, let's say, Messi, you bring Messi to a local soccer team in a developing country like Panama, and he plays with the local team for a year. Of course, the local team is going to benefit from having Messi teaching them the techniques and everything and the discipline and all things required to be a great soccer player, world class soccer player. So the same thing with innovation. You first bring innovators to your country, you learn from them through clinical research, and then eventually you're gonna start thinking about how you can innovate on your own.
Hmm. So, how is AI being used to speed up regulatory um, approval or trial logistics?
Well, in many ways, Joanna, AI, as I said initially, AI is having an impact in all phases of clinical research. In regulatory approvals, of course, if you have, let's say, a dossier package, a dossier is the package folder that you need to put together for review and approval of the ethics committee or the IRB, Institutional Review Board, and the National Regulatory Agency, the FDA, or any other Ministry of Health agency around the world. So usually the document package is about 1,000 pages or more. So imagine having humans reviewing all these, putting all these together. And imagine a regulatory agency having to review all these when you receive 1,000 submissions a month, for example, in a large country like Brazil. So
Mhm.
you have to come up with ways to automate the process of reviewing and approving these trials. So that's when AI can help
Mhm.
in the putting together the packages and also in the regulatory agencies in the way they review and approve the packages. And also with translations. I mean, imagine translating to Spanish or Portuguese more than 1,000 pages of complex science language. Now it's a lot easier with AI and more precise, actually, better than humans.
Mhm.
And in patient recruitment, I mean, there are already AI tools that can take a very complex clinical trial protocol or very complex patient informed consent form and can reduce it to just a few pages with graphs, in like an infographic type of document in a simple language form that any patient can understand. Because these type of documentation that are patient facing, they have to be so simple that anybody with little education, anybody off the street should be able to read clinical trial patient-facing information. So that's a challenge. So imagine humans trying to make it happen. Now with AI, we can easily make it happen in 5 minutes. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that is where AI is helping a lot is with patient recruitment. As I said, if the documents are now easier to understand, it's going to help with patient recruitment because if you confuse a patient, the patient will say no, very likely, right? But
Mm-hmm.
now with simple language documentation, then the patient will likely say yes because it will easily and quicker understand the benefits and risk of the trial. And
Mm-hmm.
also, when you set up social media campaigns, you can test the most effective ads. Now with AI, you can do A/B testing really quickly. You can change the ads really quickly with AI, everything automated. You can set up landing pages and you can adapt the landing pages to based on the test that you do with AI. So you remove the human element completely out
Mm-hmm.
of it. The AI can test the ads, can test different versions of the landing page, and can also test different versions of the screening questionnaire, which is really key to
Mm-hmm.
bring patients into the funnel. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So families are often nervous about going overseas to, especially now with Trump trying
yeah,
to keep people in the other
yes,
countries.
exactly.
Uh, Not to bring politics into this, but sometimes there's
Yeah,
no way to avoid it.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, uh, what should they look for to make sure a study is ethical and legitimate?
Yes. Well, the first of all, you have to ensure that the trial was properly approved by an ethics committee, by an accredited ethics committee, meaning that every Ministry of Health or regulatory agency like the FDA or the Ministry of Health in Colombia, in Chile, they all have different names, but it's the same. They have to certify ethics committees. They make sure that ethics committees are properly trained and they have standard operating procedures, etc. So if you as a patient want to test, want to validate the a clinical trial, then you look at the somehow you ask the investigator to show you the approval letter from the ethics committee to show you that that ethics committee was properly certified by the national regulatory agency or the Ministry of Health of that country and that the Ministry of Health or regulatory agency of that country approved also the clinical trial. Because usually you need two approvals. You need the IRB or Ethics Committee approval, IRB meaning Institutional
Mm-hmm.
Review Board approval. And that IRB of Ethics Committee is usually, as I said, certified by the national government. So you look for proof of that. And you also look for proof of that the regulatory agency or Ministry of Health of that country also approved the trial. And you also need to look for you need to validate that that investigator is properly trained in clinical research, following international standards. That's easily validated with looking at the certificate. So I think all the check and balances are already in place for any patient to easily validate this. And also, if the trial is listed on clinicaltrial.gov, is very likely a legit trial. It's not a yeah, it's not a fake one. I mean,
Yeah.
clinicaltrial.gov is a serious website run by the U.S. government, and it lists the sponsor of the trial. It lists a summary of the protocol with the patient inclusion and exclusion criteria. It lists the name of the investigator, the phone number of the investigator, the email of the investigator, all the data that you need to validate that that trial is legit. You can also check on some countries have national databases where you can also check that the trial is also registered in the national database. And of course, the best validation is with speaking with the investigator directly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Are there questions they should always ask a trial site or principal investigator?
I'm sure they're going to have a lot of questions, but usually those questions are addressed in the patient-informed consent because the
Mm-hmm.
patient-informed consent's objective is to anticipate all the questions. So there's a standard format that international regulations have established on how that patient-informed consent must have. And it will list all the possible answers to questions. So yeah, it will be difficult for me to try to summarize everything that is in an informed consent document now, but usually those documents are created to answer all patient questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So the other thing I thought about how do you get past the language barrier with other
Well,
countries?
that's yes, exactly. That's of course a challenge. That's of course a challenge. That's something to consider when you choose a trial in a foreign country. Of course, there are trials happening in Australia, New Zealand, where they speak
Mm-hmm.
English. If you go to a country like Mexico, Brazil, if you go to the big cities, usually people speak English, at least at the investigator level,
Mm-hmm.
hospital level. Of course, the guy at the hot dog stand will probably not speak English, but if you're speaking with educated professionals, they usually speak English really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's too much of a concern if you are in a big city in Latin America, for example, dealing with staff that is properly trained. Yeah, and a lot of these hospitals, by the way, they also cater to international patients.
Mm-hmm.
So you always have, usually in big hospitals in Latin America, you have an international patient office, and they have fully bilingual staff that help patients with any need because they understand that they don't speak the local language.
Mm-hmm. So, what red flags should families watch out for when uh, considering international care?
Well, international care in general or clinical trials?
Uh, Either.
Okay. Well, international care in general, I would say that you have to. I think clinical trials are more regulated than
Mm-hmm.
commercial international care. Let's say I want to have a dentist treatment done overseas, that's less regulated than clinical research. So if you're looking for clinical research, you're well protected because it's heavily regulated.
Mm-hmm.
But for plastic surgery and things like that, things are a little blurry uh, because the check and balances are not as strict as they are in clinical research, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, I think your audience is probably looking for something beyond plastic surgery or dental work. They're looking for more complex procedures, and those complex procedures are usually done at big hospitals, top institutions
Mm-hmm.
around the world. If we speak about Latin America, those are done in big hospitals in Mexico City, Brazil, in Sao Paulo, Bogota, Colombia, Buenos Aires, Argentina, and you can tell. I mean, you are dealing with a top facility, top hospital. You can check them online. They have all the accreditations. You can check the specialist who's going to treat you. So that's a lot easier. But if
Mm-hmm.
you just want to have dental work done at a dentist at a corner, or a plastic surgery procedure at a small clinic in a corner, then you have to be really careful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you work with so many rare diseases communities. What progress excites you the most right now?
Well, my experience has been more on the medtech, on the medical device side, rather than the rare diseases area.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some interactions with rare diseases in the context of clinical research. but it hasn't been that extensive, to be quite transparent with you. But the general progress that I see is that trials are being done faster,
Mm-hmm.
faster, and easier. That's kind of the overall thing that I've seen across all therapeutic areas, across any type of devices or rare diseases or molecules, for the reasons we just stated. AI is really, really making an impact on clinical research in all phases of the clinical research uh, execution of a project. Um, so I also see that AI is helping us discover drugs faster, cheaper, and easier than before. And that makes the discovery process a lot more targeted. In other words, before we were failing a lot. I mean, pharmaceutical companies were failing a lot because the discovery process was very manual, very expensive, very laborious, time consuming. But now with AI, we automate all that. So the discovery process is more effective, meaning that if we discover a molecule using AI, now the chances of that molecule being effective, safe and effective in a human on a clinical trial is going to be way higher than before. So I think that's in itself a huge progress because
Mm-hmm.
you're not wasting time and money and effort on the patient side and on the pharmaceutical company side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to parents who feel like they are uh, running out of options?
Hmm. Yeah. As I said, I think the first step is to go to clinicaltrial.gov and or speak with your physician, your specialist about the possibility of participating in a trial, because not all specialists are aware of all the trials that are available around the world. I mean, the fact
Mm-hmm.
that you are dealing with a top physician doesn't mean that he knows the clinical trials that are happening around the world. So you have to kind of work alongside him or her in the exploratory process of a clinical trial in the country or overseas.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, in the United States is also a huge country. So if I live in Oklahoma City, I don't know if there is a trial in Alaska happening that may benefit me or my patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that you find on clinicaltrials.gov. That's why the database is there. It's set up to help patients find trials that can benefit them.
Mm-hmm. So, Leo, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your insights into how families can access hope and treatment pathways beyond borders. Um, what you've shared applies across the entire ultra rare landscape. So many navigating limited options and enormous barriers. As we recognize Rare Disease Awareness Month, conversations like this remind us why storytelling, advocacy, and global collaboration matter so deeply. If you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you're listening to one of the many audio versions on one of the many audio platforms, you can use the send me a text link in the show notes, which is also available on the audio version on YouTube. See, to share your story or ask a question. Don't forget to subscribe to the Rare Connection podcast and to my YouTube channel, Rare Chef. And there is an underscore between Rare and Chef. You can also follow Rare Connection on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and join the Facebook communities, Rare Connection and the Adaptive Kitchen. And as always, if you or someone you know is struggling, you can call or text 988, or you can text home to 741-741. You are never alone. And support is always available. Check back next week for a conversation on spinal muscular atrophy. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for
Thanks.
having me here.